I would like you to consider some of the most important moments in mixed martial arts history. Even though we were aware at the time that each of these events was significant, now things have changed, and no one can remember them. However, these unnoticed events have shaped the sport in unexpected ways. And now we're going to look at 7 seemingly minor occurrences that eventually changed everything. Number 1. TRT. What was said by Chael? The American player was suspended for a year after his TE ratio, following Anderson Silva's title challenge, turned out to be almost 17 times that of a normal man. Chael did, however, discuss his diagnosis of hypogonadism and his use of testosterone replacement treatment, for which he said Nevada was informed and had granted him a medical exemption. But that isn't the most significant aspect of the story. The true revelation in this case, however, was TRT, a little-known flaw that a few years later became the largest crisis in sports history. Number 2. John Skipper resigns. If you're not particularly involved in the sports broadcasting industry, you most likely didn't know John Skipper's name when he left ESPN. So, allow me to briefly introduce him. In 1997, Steve began working for ESPN, the magazine, and by 2012, he was holding the position of company president. Of course, ESPN Plus was one of his major initiatives. According to many sources, John Skipper was not a fan of mixed martial arts and did not want it on the platform, so the UFC would not have been shown it if he still ran the service today. Unfortunately, Skipper was fired by ESPN due to a drug case, and his role as the CEO of ESPN Plus would be taken over by a man named Kevin Mayer, who was close to UFC owner Ari Emanuel. The ESPN deal, facilitated by new president James Pitaro's friendship with Dana White, remains in effect today. However, as a fight fan, you wouldn't have been particularly affected by John Skipper's resignation unless you had insider knowledge of all of these executives and their connections to the UFC. Next up, number 3, UFC 30's location. UFC 30 is an excellent example of how an event's location can be just as significant as its contents. The location was insignificant with far-reaching effects that nobody could have possibly predicted. This would be the first UFC event hosted by Zuffa, and there would be no pay-per-view distribution. This was the Dark Ages. The business was dead. It was therefore not a simple task to even select a venue outside of the South. Finally, they hosted it at the Trump Taj Mahal Resort and Casino. The Zuffa era started with back-to-back shows at the Taj Mahal, which led to a lifelong connection with Donald Trump. This partnership would have far-reaching consequences when one of the two parties became president of the United States. Number 4. Conor and Floyd. Conor McGregor had an interview with Esquire magazine in 2015. It was a lifestyle magazine for males. This was Conor's journey to face Jose Aldo before he became a rising star. During the interview, McGregor mentioned Floyd Mayweather as an example of a boxer who is not a complete fighter. He said, "If you put me face-to-face with Floyd Mayweather, pound-for-pound boxing's best. If I fought Floyd, I would kill him in less than 30 seconds. It would take me less than 30 seconds to wrap around him like a boa constrictor and strangle him." 2 years later, they would compete in the second largest boxing battle of all time. The beginning was that interview. Previously, there was no connection between them, and the interview was the catalyst that sparked their relationship. Floyd was asked about what he thought about what Conor said, and then it just escalated from there. So remember, kids, always shoot your shot in interviews, and it helps if you are the biggest star in an entire industry. Next up at number 5, Olympic judoka joined Strikeforce. Look, you are a true elite fan if you watch the early Strikeforce fights. Although Rousey quickly rose to prominence in the main event, at the time, no one could have imagined the impact that this Olympic bronze medalist would have had on the sport, propelling WMMA forward by almost 10 years. Her first victory in Strikeforce was also controversial. Sarah Kaufman cried out in pain during an armbar, and so the fight was stopped by Steve Mazzagatti. However, everything happened so quickly that there was a big confusion among commentators and the crowd. It was a mess. However, in a few years, this woman is definitely going to completely change the face of mixed martial arts, even inspiring presidents and Lady Gaga to tweet about it. Number 6. Flash Entertainment joins the UFC. In 2010, Flash Entertainment purchased a 10% stake in parent company Zuffa. A few months later, the UFC made its first tour to Abu Dhabi. However, Flash Entertainment, as it turned out, was a subsidiary of the government of Abu Dhabi, meaning that Abu Dhabi essentially owned a part of the UFC for nearly 10 years. And this friendship would have far-reaching consequences, as you would have imagined. The UFC shifted towards world fighting, prioritizing international markets. Prominent talent from previously overlooked locations is going to have a significant influence on advancement. This story seemed insignificant, but it actually changed the sports landscape in the following decade. Last but not least, number 7, Joe Rogan, the TV actor Joe Rogan. Yes, so it wasn't an enormous deal when young Joe joined the commentary team at UFC 37.5 in 2002. This is going to have a huge impact on the future. There is no way that you could have imagined the impact this man would have on the entire world through his massive podcast, even if you could have predicted that his time with the UFC would be significant, and that he would be regarded as the greatest commentator in history. While Joe's acting and stand-up comedy were impressive, his role in the UFC made him a pop cultural icon. However, the UFC played a significant role in his podcast's expansion. That brings us to the end of this video. Let's meet again with another interesting video.